Good evening, everyone. Welcome all of you once again in the Focus weekly session for ethics. We'll take up three news articles from the previous week and discuss them from the perspective of ethics. The first article that I've chosen for discussion is this. This is a news that Trump's coin has made 100 million in profit as trading fees, and small traders, as always, have lost. This is kind of in line with cryptocurrency and digital currency. Here there's a aspect in the article which is very important from the point of view of public administration, the concerns and dilemmas that the syllabus mentioned in the beginning of the sixth chapter. And here you see there's an important note. There's an ethical concern that in effect Mr. Trump has the power to regulate his own business. And that is a clear case of conflict of interest. Even during the first term of the President Trump, it was said that since he has so much of business interest in the real estate, he must give it up as now he has become the president. But he did not give it up. Because as a president, you are a super regulator. You can make policies for the entire country, including the real estate, including where your business interests are. In that case, you'll be effectively regulating yourself. Regulation is a process that maintains impartiality, non-partisanship, fairness. It's an idea of justice. It's for the purpose of ethical governance. But when you are the regulator, you can't help but bring in your interest in the process of regulation. And instead of public interest, work for your personal interest, which is the fundamental idea behind conflict of interest. So if the regulator is regulating himself, if the judge is judging himself, that's a classical case of conflict of interest. So we'll take up the issue of a conflict of interest. In syllabus, if you go through your syllabus of ethics in the sixth chapter, they mentions ethical concerns and ethical dilemmas, ethical concerns and dilemmas in public and private administration. There are many ethical concerns in public administration. And the most fundamental of all of them is conflict of interest. Conflict of interest is a scenario where your personal interest and your public interest come into conflict, or other interest, like official interest. They start conflicting with public interest. And when that start conflicting with public interest, it creates problem. It's create problem, and the problem will keep on compounding as you keep on working with conflict of interest. The purpose of administration is public service. The root word administration has come from the root word administar. Administar literally means to serve. So the purpose and meaning both of administration is to serve. To serve whom? To serve people, all the people. So public service is the idea behind administration that gives it legitimacy. You know the reason why this elaborate bureaucracy that exists, so much of money goes into the maintenance of bureaucracy and so much of power is wielded in the hands of bureaucracy. Why? For what? The only legitimate reason why power is held by bureaucracy is that it is working for public interest, which is the literal meaning of administration. So a bureaucrat should come to administration with no other purpose but to serve public interest. Any other purpose will pollute this idea of administration and will delegitimize administration. Administration would have no right to exist if it doesn't serve public interest. It is very important concept. So if you bring any other interest apart from public interest, that will lead to conflict of interest. And what will that do? That will do things that you can't imagine or can't anticipate. For example, if you bring any other interest, your time and energy will now go for that particular interest. So you will not be having the same alacrity, the same zeal, the same energy, the same spirit for public interest. And your spirit of public service will start declining. Since you are not having just one point goal, you're having some other goals as well, which is your personal interest, private interest, interest of yourself, interest of your friends and families. So you're preoccupied somewhere. You won't be working as efficiently and you will not be thinking as robustly. So your power of imagination, innovation, and creativity will decline. You overall will show low moral aptitude in administration. So you will be less efficient. Slowly, gradually, you will not be working as much as you could have. So you'll start to hide things. This will lead to lack of probity and openness in governance. You won't like to be transparent because you're not giving your full shots. And it is said that corruption breeds in darkness. The more you hide, the more you make the system vulnerable for corruption. So when you start to hide things, now you are not working with full potential. You're not showing moral aptitude, power of imagination, and innovation. But when you try to hide things, you may drop one level below that, and you may end up not performing your duties. Performance of duty, especially the legal and professional duty, that's bare minimum. उसके ऊपर you have imagination and creativity and leadership and persuasion and communication. In general, your moral aptitudes, your dedication, spirit of service. That is because when you have one point agenda, that's the purpose of your life. Public interest service is your goal of life. And that's how you should come in administration. But you brought another interest, and that is creating the problems. So you may end up in not performing your duties because system is opaque. You think that it won't be found out. So it's convenient actually to not perform duties. When you don't perform your duty, then there would be ramification in society. The consequence would be very harsh. In society, there would be lack of fairness. Fairness is an idea that the benefit and burden must be equitably shared. Burden should not unnecessarily come on the vulnerable section or one section or the other section. Benefit must be distributed and burden must be distributed. That's the idea of fairness. And you do understand that it's the poor people, the vulnerable class, who are more dependent on the government services. If the public transportation stops, then people having private vehicle won't have that much of problem. But the working class, the labor class, they will have problem. If the public transportation stops, if the government hospital shut down, if the government school shut down, who will have problem? The middle class, they own their own vehicle. They don't go to government hospital. They don't send their children to government schools. So if the government services stops, if the PDS stops, if the farmer subsidy stops, the problem would be on the weak and vulnerable section. So not performing your duty, you're not hurting the rich. As a government official, you don't perform your duty, you're not hurting the rich so much. You're hurting the poor. That will cause problem with regard to equity, fairness, justice in society. And from here, when you stop performing your duty and has caused problem, you can stoop down further. Initially, you would not perform as much as you could have. So your spirit of service, dedication will go. Now you're not performing your bare minimum as well. The worst is still to come. What worst can happen from here is that you're not just not performing your duty, you're actually involved in active form of corruption. You're embezzling public money, you're taking money home, you're using public office for private gain. You are creating more problem in system because आदत आपको लग चुकी है. And this conflict of interest becomes a thin edge of the wedge that will enter inside the system and wreck it open. You will take away the institutional integrity. You will be completely corrupt. You will corrupt the work culture of the system. You will violate the organizational goals, the mission statements. You will violate the basic principles of governance. For what? For what? For your personal interest. Why would you take money home? Why will you do embezzlement of money? Why will you be involved in bribery? For your personal interest. It seems like that there's a personal interest there. It's a notional interest. It's not the real interest, but we relate that to our personal interest. That's wrong. And the whole thing will happen. The whole public institution will sink down because of some selfish personal interest. So what is the remedy? The remedy of the whole problem is don't bring it in. Don't bring it in. Come to administration with the only and only purpose of public interest. If you read the seventh chapter of your syllabus, the very first thing mentioned there is the concept of public service. And then there are other topics mentioned. But the concept of public service is the first. Philosophical basis of governance is the second topic. Uske baad you have RTI, citizen charter, work culture, code of conduct, code of ethics. All of that come later. The very first thing a civil servant must understand and imbibe is concept of service. And that calls for ending your personal interest. Service is for others. So your personal interest should not come inside the administration at all. But personal interest, you see, if you hold a share of, suppose, Cipla, and you are the health minister, so that is counted as a personal interest. Any business interest, any financial interest that you're holding, that is your personal interest in the eyes of laws. Any interest or in your bloodline, that is also the personal interest. Suppose you're a judge of Delhi High Court, as it happened recently, and your brother is a lawyer practicing in Delhi High Court. And your brother comes, his case is assigned to your court, and he's arguing his case in your court. The judge is a brother, and the lawyer is a brother. That is a personal interest there. You like it or not, whether you will do the favor to the brother or not, it is immaterial for the law. For the law, if your blood relation is there, that is counted as personal interest. So your personal interest will be to give favor to your brother, and the public interest is to impartially adjudicate the case. But there is a personal interest, and that will create interference. So that is also counted as personal interest. So all of that will create conflict of interest. Conflict of interest can come because of your financial interest. You may accept the gifts, or you have ownership interest, you have investment in some of the companies, you own the corporate shares. All of that is finance related conflict of interest. Conflict of interest could also be relationship based. For example, you're letting your family and friends or close associates to have access to the organizational resources, or you give preferential access in the meetings, or you pass on the information of the organization to them. That is relationship related conflict of interest. Conflict of interest could also be based upon post employment. Like the judges, it is alleged that judges in the fag end of their career go easy on the government, because once they retire, the executive becomes their employer. The appointment to various commissions that judges are routinely appointed to, that is done by the executive. And in the Supreme Court, or also in the High Court, the cases are against the executive. Many of them. Many of the cases are against the state. So they go easy on the executive, which is alleged, because they are going to find favor in terms of employment once they retire. So if you're looking for a post-employment, and one of your client presently is going to be a future employer, that kind of scenario also creates conflict of interest. Conflict of interest could also be because of your ideology that can create biasness and prejudice in the function that you're performing currently. Any kind of interest, business interest, financial interest, relationship interest, ideological interest that comes into the decision making, that is counted as conflict of interest. Conflict of interest, UPSC has given this as definition in one of the contextual statement in the question. UPSC has given this definition. See, conflict of interest arises when official duties, public interest, and personal interest are taking priority one above the other. Or in other words, anything that conflicts with public interest, anything that conflicts with public interest, whether your personal interest or official duties. If suppose as a Havaldar, you have been asked to do lathi charge, for service discipline, for hierarchy and listening to the command of the senior, you'll have to do that. But sometimes it may not be in public interest to do that. There you'll be working with conflict of interest in that scenario. In many ways, official duties may not be aligned with the public interest if the order and the commandment of the senior are not just, if the laws and the rules, regulations are not just. It can go against public interest. That will also be counted as conflict of interest. Whatever hinders public interest is a scenario of conflict of interest. Because public interest, for the reason to serve public interest, administration exists. Otherwise, there is no reason for administration to exist. So it's a very fundamental thing, so fundamental that there are three kinds of conflict of interest discussed in literature: actual conflict of interest, potential conflict of interest, and perceived conflict of interest. So important that all three levels conflict of interest is discussed. Actual conflict of interest is that when there is proven conflict of interest, like blood relation, that can be proven. We're holding the share, that can be proven. So when there's a proven conflict of interest, in reality, there is a conflict. That is actual conflict of interest. Potential conflict of interest is a scenario where presently there is no conflict of interest, but there's potentiality. In the future, there could be. Could be. For example, suppose an MLA marries an IAS officer. It's quite common in some of the states. And presently it's all well. There's no problem as such, because this MLA is not the boss of the IAS officer, is not doing the performance evaluation, the transfer and posting is not in the hands, but in future it could be. The MLA can become the minister at the state level, may also become chief minister, and then the evaluation, transfer, posting will be in your hand. And then you would like your spouse to be close by, so you will give a favorable transfer and posting. But that's in your personal interest, but that's not in the public interest. So the kind of relation that you develop, potentially it can give rise to conflict of interest later on. And it is such a sensitive thing that conflict of interest is also talked about in terms of potentiality. Perceived conflict of interest is a scenario where there actually may not be conflict of interest, neither actual nor potential, but in the perception of others, there is a conflict of interest. People perceive that you carry interest when you do not. You know you don't have any such interest, but people perceive that you're holding an ideology, an agenda, you're holding some biasness. That is in the perception of people. For example, some believed that our ex-CGI, Justice Chanchud, he hold liberal opinion. And many disregarded that against the traditional values, especially in the judgment that Supreme Court was adjudicating regarding the gay marriage rights. The case went on for very long and Supreme Court took its time to give the final judgment. And you might know that initially Justice Chanchud was also on the bench that was adjudicating the matter of the gay rights and the marriage rights in India. And many in the bar and even outside, they wanted Justice Chanchud to recuse. Because in their view, Justice Chanchud was too liberal. And they thought that because he's liberal, he will disregard the traditional values of India and he will be too easy. And he is actually going to give the marriage rights, disregarding the other side of the opinion. Now, here it's a case of perception. People perceive you to be biased. You may not be. You may be thorough with all the considerations and you will take time to decide. And considering everything, you will come to a nuanced judgment. But people perceive you that way. And when the conflict of interest is actually neither real nor potential, but it is based upon perception of people, that is perceived conflict of interest. So there are three of them. And when you see three, you always have to remember that in the title of the paper, there are also three terms: ethics, integrity, and aptitude. And three will always bind, always bind. You see in other questions and other topics, and these three will always bind. If you have governance, good governance, and ethical governance, that three and these three will always bind. Will be a correspondence. When your ethics are standards and principles. If you don't have the right standards, if you're blatantly working for your personal interest rather than public interest, that is actual conflict of interest. Right now, there is no conflict of interest, but in future, there is no certainty that whether you'll be consistently working for public interest or not, you will start working for your spouse. There is no guarantee for that. So when your consistency is at risk, that's a matter of integrity. The basic definition of integrity is giving effect to ethics, even during adversity. That's the fundamental idea of integrity. So if there is a question on your consistency, whether you'll be able to be consistent in the future or not, it's a matter of integrity then. To protect your integrity, to remain consistent even in the future, you must be very mindful of potential conflict of interest as well. And when others perceive you the way, what should you do? What should you do if others perceive you to be biased? If others perceive you to be biased, whether you should pay attention or not. Governance is not carried forward by genius. Governance is carried forward by trust. It's very important that no relationship can be carried forward without trust. Trust is the glue of life. So if there is no trust, there will be no respect of your judgment. The best is to recuse what Justice Chanchud did. If suppose the judgment was to allow for gay marriage, the judgment was not that, except on the point of marriage, they have allowed intimacy and they have allowed cohabitation. But on a technical ground, they haven't allowed marriage, gay marriage. But suppose they would have allowed it and Justice Chanchud would have been there, then there would have been a lot of opposition to that. And they think that this is not a sound judgment because Justice Chanchud is biased in this way. But good is out. And in that case, this question of biasness also goes away and the acceptability of the judgment also increases. So to be mindful of how other people perceive you, it's also important for an administrator. It's a question of trust building. And it requires sensitivity to understand the perspective of others, which is a fundamental aptitude. Without sensitivity, without consciousness, you won't be able to accommodate others' point of view. So, perceived conflict of interest aligns with aptitude, potential conflict of interest aligns with integrity, and actual conflict of interest aligns with ethics. This is important to relate things like this so that you align the topic with your subject. Now, there could be many reasons why you land in conflict of interest. You can land in conflict of interest. There could be many upstreams of causes of conflict of interest. You may not have concept of public service. You haven't come into service for service. Rather, you think it's your vicarious pleasure to get inside because you've worked so hard. And now it is your privilege. So all the powers that you hold, it's your privilege and you can use it either ways. Because you have earned it after clearing such a competitive exam, it's a very psychological thing for many to think that now they deserve some money. Now they deserve some ijat, some reputation, and all the perks and privileges that there are. It's hard earned. People don't go there with the mindset of service, perhaps because of the difficulty and so many attempts and so much of hard work that goes into clearing the exam. That might be a factor in creating this psychological tendency of using the system for your interest now. You have to enter public service understanding that that is a service. It's always for others. This cognitive preparedness is not there. You're not ready to work for public interest. There is not internalization of civil service values. The 6th chapter begins from public service values and ethics in administration. The values of impartiality, fairness, justice. Maybe the ethical training has not happened, or you have not taken interest to imbibe that and make that part of your character. So you're not doing service because the fundamental values that feeds into service, conscience that feeds into service has not been awakened. You are very poor in your aptitude. Your greed you can't manage because you do not have emotional intelligence, no self-regulation, negative emotions of greed, lust, hedonism, you can't balance. So you want money. If you see money, you want money. And you're dealing as a DM with so much of fun. So you will be withdrawing some of them for your own interest. Fundamentally, the orientation is not right. That's the reason. You're not ready to work as a trustee, as a caregiver. Trustee has to take care of others under the social contract. That's the defined position of the sovereign in the social contract of John Locke. You are a trustee, you are a caregiver. Your main job is to give it to others and not find yourself as beneficiary and look for benefit from the system. But वो नहीं है, वो आपके अंदर नहीं है, वो कैरेक्टर नहीं है, वो वैल्यूज नहीं है, तो नहीं है फिर. There could be reasons for administrative reasons, for lack of training, lack of clear rules and code of conduct, lack of enforcement of that. So, lack of tools of accountability, poor oversight, lack of social audit, the work culture that inculcates values, just like society inculcates values in us, that may be missing. So, you haven't taken care to develop your character, and system doesn't take care to develop character and enforce virtues. That is a prime reason why you're carrying an interest, your personal interest, and not working only and only for public interest. That's prime reason for conflict of interest. Conflict of interest, if occurs, then I told you, this conflict of interest will cause each one of them. From just not lowering your aptitude, conflict of interest, lack of that, bringing any other interest will take away your interest from public interest. You're not interested in public interest anymore. You're not interested in performance of your duty. Rather, you're interested in your own interest. You're interested in doing corruption, financial corruption, all sort of corruption. They all are the downstreams. They all are what uh, conflict of interest will lead to. And broadly, these will result in other things like biased policy formulation, unfair allocation of resources, skewed contract awards, selective law enforcement, misuse of public resources, and on and on. On and on. All form of corruption will stem out towards the end. So it's a small hole that's created in the ship, and the ship eventually is going to sink. So conflict of interest must not be allowed. It must not be allowed. And how not to allow it? The best way to deal with conflict of interest is one, to be transparent and disclose the information, disclose your financial holdings, disclose, do the financial disclosure, record the minutes of meeting and disclose that, put that in public domain, disclose all political contributions and relationships. If I don't know who brother is, then I don't know judge if you're judging it well. It was there recently happened in Delhi High Court. It was figured out later that one brother was judge and one brother was the lawyer. If it is not known that somebody is working with conflict of interest can't be figured out. So disclosure of all sort should be there. And once things are disclosed and it is discovered by yourself or others are pointing to you that you're working with conflict of interest, the only thing left is to recuse. Recuse and restrict your role with regard to that activity. Let other person do it and you do not interfere in that. Recuse yourself and simultaneously also restrict yourself. Don't interfere. Suppose you are heading a bidding process and your nephew has applied in that bidding process. If you're heading the bidding process and your nephew has applied for it, then in the eyes of the law, your personal interest is to give the bid to your nephew. But for public interest, there should be transparent and impartial bidding process. You can't say that I'm not going to do any favor to my nephew and in years I haven't talked to him even. That is not, we don't know what's happening between you and your nephew. For law, your blood relation is counted as your personal relation. So in that case, what is to be done? In that case, the only thing to be done is please recuse and let other person head the bidding process for the sake of trust of people in the bidding process that is going on. Otherwise, suppose even you do it on merit and your nephew turns out to be the best bidder. So in that case, the bid has to go to nephew. So on merit, if you give, people would not know you have given that on merit or you have done a favor to your nephew. So to maintain public trust, you have to recuse. And for the long term, there must be ethics policies and enforcement and organizational culture must be developed that people naturally, they do the disclosure and recusal. They don't like to work with conflict of interest. All right. UPSC has asked many questions. In 2017, they asked conflict of interest in public sector arises when official duties, public interest, and personal interest are taking priority one over the other. This is the definition I've used for conflict of interest. How can this conflict of interest be resolved? We just did 4 steps of conflict of interest resolution. They are these: transparency and disclosure, recusal and restriction, ethics policies and enforcement, and organizational culture maintenance. That's how you do it. Describe with an example. The examples for each of the 4 points are given here in PPT for all 4 of them. You can pick it up from there. Public servants are likely to confront with issues of conflict of interest. What do you understand by the term conflict of interest, which I believe you clearly know what is conflict of interest, and how does it manifest in the decision making by public interest? How does it manifest? It manifests like these. It manifests in lowering down your spirit, your innovation skill, your creativity, your imagination, in general, your aptitude. You lose interest and you end up not performing the duties and you end up fulfilling your own private interest, selfish personal interest. All these and all these written here. Each point here is manifestation of conflict of interest. This is how it manifests. This is how it comes out. This is how it takes roots and express itself. If faced with conflict of interest situation, how would you resolve it? Just the same thing in the previous question, how to overcome the problem of conflict of interest, the 4 steps. The next article that we are going to take up here is this: do not reduce forest land for linear projects, says Supreme Court. Using this topic, we are going to discuss some aspects of environmental ethics. And then we'll do a question that was asked in 2015. Environmental ethics. What are the broad things that we should take care when we are dealing with developmental projects impinging on the rights of the environment? One of the fundamental thing is ecological sustainability. The concept of deep ecology, that there's intrinsic value in the ecosystem, intrinsic value. Like we talk of intrinsic rights for human beings. The land ethics or challenging notion of humanocentric world, talking of biocentric ethics, where not just human life, but all life has inherent worth. There are certain things mentioned in the article regarding these points, like mandatory compensatory afforestation. And you understand this from your knowledge of polity. If at all you have to cut down some trees, you have to compensate for that elsewhere. Protection of undeclared forests, prevention of ecological disbalance, preservation of ecological balance. That's about a very fundamental foundation of any ethics is the inherent rights. The fundamental foundation of social contract is what? Natural rights of John Locke. Inherently, things have rights. That will be the fundamental of environmental ethics as well. Intrinsic value of ecosystem. Any branch of ethics will have roots in this basic idea, the theoretical foundation that will develop that ethics. So we're talking of environmental ethics, and the theoretical foundation for this: environment has intrinsic values and all life has inherent worth. That is the biocentric world, not humanocentric. Then the concept of justice. Justice means to balance, to synthesize the conflicting interests. There could be the idea of distributive justice, fair distribution of environmental benefits and burden, or procedural justice, inclusion of people, all stakeholders in decision making, and justice of recognition, acknowledging diverse stakeholders. For example, the forest dwellers and tribals acknowledging their rights as well. That is about justice. This is a process of balancing things out. And if you take the opinion of all, and then only you can, in a just and fair manner, carry forward with the developmental projects. From this standpoint, article has some points like broad definition of forest rights. Supreme Court has given the dictionary meaning and not the legal meaning to broaden that up. Protection of community forests, not protected directly by the government, but in the developmental projects, government has to take care for protection of community forest as well. Equal treatment of declared and undeclared forests. That's the idea of broadening the protection, justice. After any theory of justice, you require effective management, and that is called as stewardship, environmental stewardship, anthropocentric responsibility. It's a human duty to protect the environment, virtue ethics in conservation, development and imbibing the environmental character, the virtues, environmental based virtues, compassion, empathy and compassion for environment, care ethics, responsibility to give care to nature. And from this standpoint, from the standpoint of environmental stewardship, effective management, the article mentions the government's role as a trustee. Trustee is one who gives care, is a caregiver, a caretaker is a trustee, to whom the responsibilities has been entrusted. The Conservation Act's implementation and long-term protection mechanisms using technology and otherwise that the government must develop. Then the other aspects of environmental ethics would be sustainable development ethics. Sustainability can come from many ideas. And this also was asked once in the prelims, I think in 2019. The Brundtland Commission principles. Before the Brundtland principles came before the idea of sustainable development, and that was actually the precursor to the theories of sustainability and some of the ideas were propounded here in these principles. The triple bottom line theory or environmental economics ethics, balancing economics with environment, like sustainable tourism. Sustainable tourism is for economy and sustainability is for environment, but having both of them simultaneously. That would be sustainability in your stewardship. In the management, in the effective management, the elements of sustainability must be there. And the article mentions certain points with this regard, like balanced development with conservation, linear projects. And linear projects like the rail lines or the roads, there is not much scope of maneuvering. If there's a forest, then you can have a turnaround. That is won't be very profitable. It will take you more resources and it will make the path longer. In long term, it will consume a lot of time for the commuters. But the article suggests that even for linear projects, the sustainability idea should be protected. And there are many ideas that has come up for this. You can have a linear project, but you can have a pull over it so that the animals still can go in the same way that they were moving ahead. And you can make it more green and cover it with grasses or the small plants to make it look like the infrastructure project is gelling up in the same ecosystem. So the animals, they don't get turned away by looking at the new structure. Otherwise, they won't use it. So the linear projects, that should also be very mindful of the environment. There should be compensatory mechanisms of some kind if the linear project is impinging on the rights of people because of displacement or otherwise. In the management or in development of ethics otherwise in any field, even if that is journalistic ethics, you have to have precaution. You have to check the facts before broadcasting. Precautionary principles have to be followed in environmental ethics as well. So the risk assessment, the preventive action, and care for the future generation. That's part of the precautionary principle in environmental ethics. And the article touches on these aspects by talking about strict forest protection measures, prevention of deforestation, and comprehensive forest definition. As I told you earlier, the Supreme Court goes by the dictionary meaning of forest, not by the legal meaning of forest. So Supreme Court has a very broad idea for even undeclared forest. They are also counted as forest. Community managed forest is also forest for the purpose of conservation and the judgment that Supreme Court gives. Responsibilities. Having frameworks on corporate environmental responsibilities. We don't have that. We have corporate social responsibility, very popular, but corporate environmental responsibility can enhance, strengthen the protection of environmental ethics. State environmental duties, which is not much talked about. State has a duty. The state is a trustee, has a duty in all spheres. But having a concept of a state environmental duty that will strengthen environmental ethics, collective environmental obligations. that we also do not talk about. Although some aspect is there in fundamental duties, conservation of environment and some species to some degree has been talked about. But especially, we don't have citizens' environmental obligations. Example, the article does talk about some aspects like state accountability, record maintenance requirement. You would know that under Biodiversity Conservation Act of 2002, there's a requirement of maintaining people's registry. And the people's registry has to be maintained by the local bodies, by the Gram Sabha. So it is a responsibility of the citizens at the local level to maintain the repository of the floras and faunas in that area so that the environmental impact assessment can be done. Otherwise, what will you assess? If you don't know the resources, then how would you assess to what extent the floras and faunas will be damaged because of a project? So environmental impact assessment cannot be done without people's registry. That is a requirement of the citizens to maintain that. Those are the aspects of environmental ethics. See, there was a question in 2015, what is meant by environmental ethics? And why is it important to study it? Discuss any one environmental issue. We have discussed many issues in the 6 aspects of environmental ethics that we have discussed. You can take up any issue. But the first 2 parts, formal definition of environmental ethics could be that it's a branch of applied philosophy that studies the moral relationship between human beings and the natural environment. The beginning of your syllabus is from the topic ethics and human interface. And every kind of ethics basically deals with relationships between 2 groups, 2 systems, 2 people. And that creates interface. Like technology could work between administration and society, could work between society and environment. So the technological ethics will have to recognize relationships of these systems. And that's how we define a branch of ethics. It will examine human obligations, value of environmental preservations, moral status, whether you have intrinsic rights or not of animals and ecosystem, and will try to bring justice, balance, synthesis between development and conservation. That could be a short introduction to environmental ethics. The second part was importance. See, importance to study something. To study something is to understand. It is very important to understand things. Understanding develops knowledge. And according to Socrates, knowledge is equal to virtue. And from virtue is our final salvation. It's very important to understand. If you see the Buddhist Eightfold Path, the Eightfold Path that you must have done in art and culture, it begins with right understanding. The first step in the Eightfold Path is right understanding. So the purpose of any study, the purpose of any subject, any discipline is to understand something, to understand human nature relationship, to develop a moral framework for environmental decision making, to question our anthropocentric worldview, humanocentric world, and to identify the intrinsic rights of the ecosystem as well, and to balance the intrinsic and instrumental value of nature, the right that nature inherent has, and the benefit that we draw from nature, that value of nature. That has to be seen. And that's the aspect of environmental justice. Also, we have seen that this is how any theory progresses. You identify the rights and you discuss the conflict of the rights. That's what the code does. Fundamental right given to everyone, and they educate the conflict between the fundamental rights of 2 citizens, or when one violates the fundamental right of the other citizen. So moral significance will be this: to understand it, to develop knowledge, from knowledge develop a framework, and how to apply the framework. Applying the framework will create dilemma to resolve the dilemma. Fundamentally, the importance of studying anything, not just environmental ethics, are these. Once you have done with this, then you practically know how to maneuver the dilemma and practically apply it. So it guides environmental policy making, conservation strategies, resolve environmental conflicts, and it shapes sustainable development approaches. I'll give you example for each line written here in the next slide. And you can study anything with regard to contemporary relevance, because when you study environmental ethics, you will understand how to address climate change challenges, how to tackle the biodiversity loss, how to guide the resource management, and how to address the issue of violation of environment based rights, whether intrinsic or instrumental, meaning the right of the forest and the environment itself, or the right of the people in the coastal region, if because of the rising seawater, their habitat is submerging. So their capacity to draw the instrumental value from the environment is decreasing. Regarding understanding the human nature relationship, the example could be Chipko movement. To develop a framework, you must have read the book The Silent Spring of Rachel Carson. At least you must have heard of it. A geography teacher might have mentioned you this. The Silent Spring of Rachel Carson. The spring was silent. The spring was silent because the birds didn't come for singing. They didn't come because they are dead. They are dead because the worms are dead. They fed on worms. There are no worms to feed on. Birds are also dead. The worms that they ate, they had the bioaccumulation, so they are also dead. Bioaccumulation in the worms, or they are dead because of fertilizers, use of flooding fertilization in the agricultural fields. Because of that, the spring was silent. And she inquired more and more and more and more. And that book became actually the starting point of the environmental movement in the West, Silent Spring. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch, that highlights human impact on oceans. The protection of endangered species like pandas and others, even when they're not economically beneficial. That's the intrinsic value. That's the importance of studying environmental ethics. Montreal Protocol, policy, Project Tiger, strategy, Narmada Dam controversy, balancing the development with displacement, conflict management. Costa Rica has successfully done reforestation while maintaining the economic growth. That's the practical application, sustainable development. That's the importance of studying the discipline. Paris Agreement, climate change, Amazon rainforest deforestation, highlighting that, and urgent protection, raising the alarm bell. Biodiversity loss, resource management, water crisis demonstration, environmental justice. You can write many, many things. Placing toxic facilities, uh, uh, and liability clause in them. That could be the example of environmental justice. So each of the thing mentioned here, I have matched up the example for them on the slide. And there could be more examples for real world impacts. International ban on whale hunting really has helped in preservation of the whales. And that many policy has been successful, like California's strict vehicle emission standards. Kyoto Protocol is one of very successful international convention. Singapore's green city planning, carbon trading markets, they have picked up in the recent times. So all of that could be the importance of studying. Studying what? Studying environmental ethics. Studying things, understanding things brings practical difference in life. According to Plato, the only good is knowledge, and the only evil is ignorance. And you can have this template to highlight the importance of study of any other field, not just environmental ethics. The third article that we are going to pick up is this: Delhi's gender budget, its decline and impact. I'm not going to discuss this from the point of view of budgeting, as you might do in your economy section. And your economy teacher must have discussed this in even either in your foundation batch or otherwise QIP or these JNS videos. The concept of budgeting and the purpose of gender budgeting. And I'm pretty sure you must be familiar with the idea of gender budgeting. I'm here going to discuss some of the aspects, ethical aspects of gender budgeting. What are the ethical questions involved in gender budgeting? One of the basic things in any administrative process is the question of justice. One of the idea of justice is fairness. And the idea of fairness we discussed in the first article is equitable distribution of benefit and burden. Whatever the government does, the benefit must be distributed and the burden must also be distributed. The taxation is on everyone, albeit to different degree, to equitably distribute that. Direct taxation, but indirect tax, everybody pays, that's also distributed. So when you invest your money and you use your public fund in governance, it has to be seen how far you have been fair. And to have a focus on some areas for one gender, the females, that's part of being fair. That's part of being fair in other ways, like creation of opportunity for the other gender. And fair equality of opportunity is also an idea of Rawlsian justice. Equitable distribution of benefit and burden is the idea of Aristotelian fairness. So they come very close to a certain degree, John Rawls and Aristotle in their idea of justice. But the idea of justice is that the resource must be used for all. And if you see that the way the money is used in traditional way, then the benefit, most of the benefit goes to the men, then you have to give special provision in your budget. That's gender budgeting. Nothing wrong from the point of view of distributive justice. If you look from the point of view of capability approach of Amartya Sen or Martha Nussbaum, Amartya Sen has talked about development as a freedom. And the idea of development is very broad. It will include education. So for an individual to be free, freedom basically comes, according to Socrates, also from knowledge. And that we can say from the formal education that was not same as knowledge, but that's essential to acquire knowledge, formal education. The special provision is being made on education, on training, and real opportunities. Substantive freedom is a term used by Amartya Sen in his capability approach. Real opportunities. Opportunity for a housewife, housemaker, to say more properly, to participate in economy that Zomato and Swiggy has given. You have cloud kitchen and people can work in their own kitchen and the delivery partner will come and pick it up. It's so easy now. You don't have to use any other infrastructure and no investment, additional investment. Very easy, very easy. That is substantive freedom, real opportunity. As and when the economy finds new opportunities, opportunities are there for you as well. And for that, you require technical education that has been focused upon in the article that we're discussing. Technical education access. So if government has a program of STEM, that is to develop the capabilities. Aristotle has talked about eudaimonia. Eudaimonia meaning overall human flourishing, overall well-being, not just financial, better relationships, more confidence, better opportunities, more capacity to avail opportunities, overall well-being. That's the Greek word, eudaimonia. And that will come when you have meaningful development, which traditionally by the trickle down effect that you create jobs for the male population and they bring money home, and that because of the trickle down effect, the well being of the girls and the females improves. That's not going to work. That's not going to lead to their overall human well being and their capability development. From the point of view of equity, the gender gap, you do for your prelims, many reports, the gender gap index also you do, gender inequality index also you do. And from the point of view of fairness or equity, that gender gap must go. These are the arguments in favor of gender budgeting. From the point of view of utilitarianism and right-based approach, an ethical dilemma is created in these gender budgeting. Sometimes for gender budgeting, other things are also included like distribution of laptop to the female students, distribution of cycles or scholarships, maybe for some courses. There could be a question of freebies under gender budgeting that correspond to utilitarianism, short term, or right based, a more systemic growth, and how the gender budgeting should move forward. And in many cases, gender budgeting is more tilted towards the short term gains, and more money is set aside for the, you'd say it, freebies. It's a matter of interpretation, or that may also help in capability if cycles are distributed. The girl student can easily go to the schools and college. So that may be the part of capability. But in the general political parlance, it can also be termed as freebies. And that creates a question, and that is something that has to be taken care of when budgeting process is being carried. Then there are other things that you need to take care of, like ethics of care for all. For all, you're a trustee of all. So you have to take care of the females, the other gender as well. From the point of view of institutional ethics, fair implementation of the processes, responsibility of government institutions, obligation of public institutions. For what? For service delivery, for justice delivery. To whom? To everybody. To everybody. Delivery of health, delivery of education, delivery of ration to everyone. Invariably, year after year, in the National Family Health Survey, we see that the health system is skewed towards the male population. The insurance claim is more for male population. The hospital bed charge is always more for the male population. The smartphone access is more for the male population. The agriculture machinery is in the name more in the male population. So with regard to the institutions working for the delivery of services, it's their responsibility to take care that they are fair and their resources are equitably distributed. And everything is under the head of the social contract. Social contract is a contract of the trustee of the government with for all the people, not just for the male population. The social contract really will be given effect to if you have gender budgeting to remove the hurdles for the services and capability to develop in the females. And of course, you have feminist ethics, understanding issues from women perspective, intersectional justice, when multiple factors affects equality. Multiple factors, the cognitive factors, the affective factors, the stereotyping, the social norms, the hurdle of the law, the problem in the law enforcement, lack of sensitivity in police, everything. That is called as the concept of intersectionality. And from that view as well, you have to take care. So these are the arguments in support of gender budgeting. I will leave you with this question of 2023. To awaken the people, it is the woman who must be awakened. Once she is on the move, the family moves, the village moves, the nation moves. This is the quote of Jawaharlal Nehru. And you please try to address this quote, that what do you understand by this in the present context, and write some pointers, if possible, in the comment section.